So in a way, this session sits next to the previous one to see how, not how, what historical precedents there may be in Jewish text and tradition, but how Jewish psychedelic practitioners understand their practice today. And so we have a wide variety, a kind of a large panel. You could do that if you want. Of contemporary practitioners. Their bios are in the packet, so I won't reintroduce them. And each will make maybe just a very short kind of opening statement of 2, 3, 5 minutes of how they or their organizations see the work that they're doing in light in some Jewish context. And then we're really this will be really much more of a free-for-all conversation about what that all means. So, Zach, since you're at the end, should we start with you and then?
I thought it was going at the end.
That's why I thought we would start with you. You could make. Nope, you guys can argue with Natalie.
No, you called it. If you ask someone if they want to do a mitzvah and they want to do a good deed, are they going to say no? No.
Sometimes yes.
Sometimes. Should they? Okay. Good morning, and there is so much to be grateful for and so much to celebrate just in this room. Our holidays, our friends, our colleagues, all of these threads being woven together, leadership. It's a celebration of years of work that we have put in big and small ways. And there's also so much to mourn and grieve for at the same time. And this seems to be the beginning of the story shared by my tradition, but not made into the canon, from the Book of Jubilees. Where does plant medicine come from? According to the Book of Jubilees, the 2nd century text that didn't make, or was left on the cutting room floor. When Noah came off of the ark, they were immediately attacked, him and his family, by demonic forces, by evil, by tragedy, by pain and sorrow. And Noah prayed to the Holy One and said, please remove this evil, remove this pain and sorrow from our midst. And so the king of the demons, Mastema, said, I will remove 9/10 of the evil in the world. Can you imagine that the world would be 9 times worse than it is right now? But I will give medicine to human beings. I will give plants to heal them with. I will teach them the craft of plant medicine in order to heal them from that 10th that still remains. And so this holy book, the book of remedies, Sefer Refuot, stayed in the hands of the Jewish people at some place in some state. And nevertheless, there was still the potential for harm. And that's why in the 3rd or 6th century, Asaph the physician wrote a book of Jewish ethics around plant healing. And I'll just read you one passage from that. It rivals the, I won't read you from that, but I will say, we have this profound tradition already that grief and healing, that harm and medicine sit in the same place. And so that we found in my organization, Sheffa, which I founded after my participation in the Johns Hopkins Religious Professional Study in 2017, and hello to all of my colleagues who are here too, that we needed spaces for Jewish people to come together to actually start to integrate, to learn, and experiment with how we could begin to work with plant medicine, as some of our other siblings say, in a good way. And so now the goal of Shefa is to create spaces for healing and self-discovery in community by integrating Jewish wisdom with psychedelic practices. Some of the threads that we heard just from the previous panel, we're trying to do that for real people. But we also want to do it from a ground-up way. Someone said that there are like tens or hundreds of thousands of Jews using psychedelics. I think there's probably over 1 million. Comparing the National Institute for Drug Abuse data on how many adults are using psychedelics, cross-tabbing with the Pew Research study that came out around 2017 about how many Jewish adults there are. That's 1 million people. And through the work that we've seen in Shefa, people are encountering Holocaust trauma from Jewish cultures that they're not part of. They're seeing their relatives that they've never met. They're encountering maps of consciousness, all of the things and more that were explained here just a moment ago. But there is no communal container. There are small communal containers, but there is no directed, focused activity in creating that communal container for people to work with these experiences. And so I just want to plug for a moment while I have everyone here. We have launched a study with Emory University, hey George, in order to understand the attitudes, the practices, and the needs of Jews towards psychedelics. So if you see this QR code, if you see the URL, take the screener. You'll get paid for it. Don't tell scammers that online, though. And please share this with your communities. We really want to understand what is the state of play in order to address those things as well as we can. So I'll just stop there, and thank you so much. Really glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adena, and I have a little organization initiative called Kimu, from the Hebrew phrase Kimu v'kiblu, for those for whom it's familiar. Stop me if you want to hear more about it, about the word. And in my regular professional life, I am helping leaders and organizations and groups of people function better, getting in touch with their purpose, getting in touch with leading, driving culture, driving values. And alongside that, for 20 years, I've been working with Jewish communities that are going through difficult transitions, supporting Jewish leaders, coaching rabbis. And the past few years, I've been birthing as a passion project, Kimu, which is an organization that is sharing Judaism in a way that is a tool for human flourishing, and in ways that just are connected to consciousness expansion. And we've been incorporating psychedelics into our events and into our practices. And what has been very alive for me and very exciting, and that I would love to share with all of you over the course of the next couple of days, is the way that we've been drawing on really deep Jewish wisdom and ritual in our psychedelic containers. What that looks like is really drawing on the ancient liturgy, on the Hebrew language, on specific moments in the Jewish calendar that have very deep, gestalt or resonance, and enlivening these experiences by touching on this ancestral connection that people have to the language, to the ritual. I think a couple more things I'll say just by introduction of what is alive for me and what's exciting about it. First of all, just seeing the power of bringing in these ancient rites and rituals and tools and words that are kind of in our bones, bringing them into these experiences, like how powerful that is for people. I should also say that we don't only have Jews in our ceremonies and in our containers, and there are so many people who are connected to this lineage who are finding that deeply resonant. Another thing that I'm finding really powerful is just the brilliance of our rituals and traditions and frameworks that already exist in the Jewish canon that are so deeply connected to all of the work that people do with psychedelics and healing. And even just thinking about that session we just had, that makes complete sense, because in a way, these have developed and potentially developed in co-creation.
Could you give one example of that, like a concrete? I know you wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I would love to. This year we had a 2-week container around the Jewish high holidays for the Days of Awe. So we had a 2-week container for people that were really engaging in this time of reflection of what we call cheshbon and nefesh, an accounting of the soul, really getting prepared for the high holidays, for settling our debts, for clearing ourselves. So we were engaged 2 weeks, daily practices, really drawing on Jewish traditions, rituals, prayers, and then working in collaboration with a Shepibo medicine woman in the Shepibo Kanibo tradition. We say braiding, so we're not melding the traditions around ayahuasca with Jewish traditions. We're holding both traditions in their purity, but really braiding them with the belief that these are all kind of windows into the same house. And a concrete example I would give would be like a very deep study of the prayer Kol Nidre, the seminal prayer of Yom Kippur, that is very much about releasing vows that we've made to ourselves that we need to release in order to heal. So doing very, very deep study of that prayer, and then having that played on the cello and chanted in a ceremony when people have already engaged really deeply with this ancient prayer and tune. Having people who are in the lineage of the Kohanim, of the priests, do the ancient priestly blessing in ceremony. These are examples of bringing these deep rituals into ceremony. And I think a big hallmark of how we're doing it is building a container leading up to it. So I think in this community, we talk a lot about integration afterwards, but we're really building like broader containers where we're leading up to a holiday or a certain moment in the Jewish calendar, and we're in daily practice together, co-regulating around these themes, and then having that experience together and integrating it. And I don't want to say too much, but I would love to share more about it here or over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Goldblatt, and I want to, again, much gratitude to Jay and Noah and to Susan and Lila and everyone who made this possible. So I have a very personal story to share, a little background. I want to express gratitude to Rabbi Michael Ziegler, who's a dear friend, teacher, and colleague, who introduced me to the sacred dimension of psychedelics decades ago, and invited me to work with Ralph Metzner, a psychedelic luminary who taught me about entering into sacred mythic structures through the use of an extraordinary range of sacred medicines. I will never forget on a Friday afternoon at the conclusion of an extraordinary 5-day experience of expansive consciousness when Ralph turned over the guiding responsibility to Michael, who skillfully introduced the group to a breathtaking Jewish journey on ketamine. Michael and I then led this group of experienced psychonauts, most of whom were not Jewish, into an ecstatic impromptu celebration of welcoming the Sabbath bride, the divine feminine, into our high desert retreat in New Mexico. I had celebrated Shabbat, the Sabbath, my whole life, and that day a whole new portal opened into my spiritual experience of this remarkable practice. I also need to acknowledge the guidance and support of my teacher and mentor, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, may his memory be a blessing, who taught me so much about the capacity of sacred medicine to engender primary religious experience. Sam talked a little bit about it in his presentation. But I want to share one example of his leadership in this area. Zalman encouraged some of his more experienced students to go up to Ashland, Oregon, to share journey space with the Santo Daime community there. Now, I had been doing what I thought was deep ecumenism for many years. Deep ecumenism coined by Matthew Fox, the great theologian, Episcopal priest, and spiritual revolutionary. Reb Zalman believed deeply in deep ecumenism, and under his guidance, we experienced the awe and wonder of the Daime practice with ayahuasca, and then were invited to share our Jewish prayer experience with the Daime community. It was simply the most remarkable interfaith experience of my life. I want to say that for more than a decade, I have been working with my own 3 siblings and their mates on the healing of our Jewish generational trauma. Sacred medicine has enabled us to reimagine the stories of our lineage and brought compassion and forgiveness to our profoundly wounded grandparents and parents, and allowed me and my siblings to heal rifts in our relationships and bring a healing balm to our epigenetic trauma. Reb Zalman commissioned some of us to more deeply explore the integration of sacred medicine into Jewish spiritual practice. And he told us when the time was right that, that we should go to work. And this past year, my wife Zoe and I have begun that work in a more serious way. This past September, we did a retreat for Jews, experienced psychonauts, and mostly disaffected Jews. The retreat was in the month preceding the High Holy Days, traditionally a time for soul searching, cheshbon nefesh, and a kind of soul inventory before the Jewish New Year. Again, I have been doing this work for more than 30 years with people not in more normal states of consciousness. And in one weekend, an experience was facilitated that I think I'd only been able to dream about before. Now, don't get me wrong, I feel like there are, as was said, many ways to do this work. Sacred medicine is not magic or a unique way to access profound spiritual experience. It's a tool that can help people who do not seem to have any other clear avenue into it. Finally, in January, Zoe and I facilitated another weekend for couples, a retreat for 6 couples focused on Jewish teachings and practices, renewed ancient skills to enhance sacred intimacy. After intentional follow-up and integration, each couple, some of whom have been together for many, many years, reported that these spiritual practices have made a significant impact on who they are as a couple and who they are committed to becoming. There is such a hunger for meaningful spiritual experience, not simply for the sake of an experience, but for ongoing spiritual practices that can bring meaning and purpose into our lives. Sacred medicine can be a richly treasured ally in this spiritual enterprise. We are one of the laboratories for this work in the Jewish stream of spirituality. We're currently developing sacred medicine retreats that deepen the grief work we've been doing over many years. And we're also developing a retreat exploring the healing power of sacred stories and storytelling. We yearn for places like this, where we can share what we're learning and what we're refining with others who are doing this work in the same and in other spiritual streams. This is an incredibly exciting time, and we're so grateful to be here to share and cross-fertilize with other people doing this essential laboratory spiritual work. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, it's loud. Okay. Hi, my name is Madison Margolin. I came into this world as a journalist, now an author, and I also want to share a bit of a personal story of how I came to really be involved in the whole Jewish psychedelic movement. So I guess it started in the womb. My parents are both of the hippie generation. My dad is close friends with Ram Dass, and so I grew up in what could be considered the results of the 60s psychedelic movement. I don't know if integration would be the word. And, really I grew up on tales of, Ram Dass and his guru and the kind of like shenanigans of Timothy Leary, who was a client of my father's, a defense lawyer. What I really observed was like a bunch of Jews from, New York and LA basically sitting around on cushions in our living room who, quote, didn't relate to post-Holocaust boomer Judaism. And so, Hebrew they checked out of, but Sanskrit, of course, is like really relatable to them. Like they understood that. And they were looking for, mysticism and connection and spiritual sustenance everywhere but Judaism. And so I, meanwhile, like I'm in Hebrew school and like growing up on like a diet of like, my mother's family who are all from New York and Brooklyn and Williamsburg and Queens, and looking at this from their perspective, being like, what is going on here? And I said to myself, like, what my parents are looking for in Hinduism and in rainbow gathering and India and whatever must be available within Judaism, including Ram Dass, who, as maybe most people here know, became very good friends with Reb Zalman toward the end of his life. So fast forward, I was in journalism school and was reporting on the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. And of course, nobody would talk to me. I went up and down Lee Avenue in Williamsburg, which is ostensibly one of the most insular religious communities in the world, and was looking for someone to talk to me. And finally, a kid on the spectrum of what you would call OTD, or off the derech, which I think is pretty pejorative, like we're all on our own path in religion, so to speak, would talk to me. And we agreed to have a time to meet, and then he flaked, and I was like, what's up with that? Where were you? He's like, sorry, I was at a Psytrance festival upstate, like I was doing a lot of like acid and Molly, and like, I said to myself, like I went to UC Berkeley, I'd done a lot of psychedelics myself, I grew up in this world, right? And I said, like, how could someone coming from such a strong Jewish orientation not have that factor into their psychedelic experience? If you're doing enough substances, like you're gonna run into yourself somewhere along the way. And so I basically distilled that question into like my life's work, which became the topic of my journalism, and a book that I wrote, which is sort of like a gonzo journalistic, like if Hunter Thompson were a Jewish girl running around New York. And the question is, can you have a Jewish experience with psychedelics, right? Or what does it mean to have a psychedelic experience that is Jewish, whether engendered by a substance or not, right? So we're kind of looking at the whole practice and facilitation and just environments where these types of experiences are taking place. So on the one hand, I was going to camping trips and festivals upstate and watching people and participating in a lot of this drug use, right? And then I also got involved with like the sort of underground Hasidic ceremony scene around ayahuasca and other compounds, and sort of seeing how that was really couched in the context and container of prayer, right? They often call it, I'm going to prayer tonight. And it's, combined with nigunim and like Jewish songs, and, everyone there speaks Yiddish. I'll say the majority of the times that I've taken ayahuasca has basically all been with Hasidim. And I invited some of them. I wish I could see more payas in the room, so I think I'm just gonna like try to speak on behalf of that community to the best that I can.
I'm just watching time.
Okay, sure. So anyways, what I'm here for is basically I really want to explore what are the practices around psychedelic Judaism. I just wrote another book on how to have a practical guide for Jewish psychedelic experience, and really using Judaism as the setting to explore consciousness and our relationship to both health and healing and spirituality, which thank God Yosef Rosen and the other speakers talked about actually in their previous session. So I'm gonna turn it over.
I'll stand for the disaffected Jews. My name is David. I felt, definitely more felt than feel, quite disconnected from my Judaism. I grew up Reform. It didn't land. Up until 4 or 5 years ago, my relationship to the religion of Judaism was going to temple with my mom out of guilt occasionally. And in parallel to that, for much of the last 10 or 15 years, I've been on a pretty serious healing journey centered largely around plant medicine, centered largely around ayahuasca, where it seemed to me increasingly apparent that we existed in some kind of animist world, universe, where there were all kinds of multidimensional beings with whom one could genuinely communicate and that had actual impacts on the world around me. And so I was holding these two separate worlds, this Judaism that I wasn't paying so much attention to, that I sort of grew up with but didn't feel, and this animist, transcendence, multidimensional reality that I was engaging with as totally separate, until a friend of mine said, you should try out this thing, this plant called Syrian rue, which I hadn't heard of. Syrian rue, like ayahuasca, is an MAOI, and if you combine it with another plant with particular qualities, you will have an experience very similar but notably different than ayahuasca. And whereas ayahuasca, I'm not going to try to finish this sentence with starting with whereas ayahuasca, but an experience that is relatively common for people who take ayahuasca is to be invited into a rich jungle-like animist universe. And when I took Syrian rue combined with this other plant, my experience felt much more desert-like, I would say, much less infinite in the number of possibilities to explore, and much more directive in the energy that it was bringing me. I might even go so far as to say much less animist and much more monotheist was my experience. And it was through this medicine, much less well-known than ayahuasca, originating in some cases in the Middle East and in the Indian subcontinent, it was through this medicine that I was dragged back into Judaism. And this medicine started to say things to me, or maybe parts of my unconscious that were way out of touch started to say things to me through this medicine, like, hey, start bringing Jews together. To which I responded, no. Not understanding that that's a really common response inside the very tradition, and that that was paradoxically a kind of awkward yes. And then somebody who's here, whose consent I didn't ask to name him, so I won't name him, but somebody who's here in this room showed up in my house one day, saw the word rue written on a glass container containing it, and said, "You've heard of the Jewish entheogen hypothesis, right?" No. And he proceeded to tell me that there was a Israeli professor who just recently passed named Benny Shannon, who had written experimentally, playfully, but also quite seriously about the possibility that Syrian rue combined with this other plant together was at the origin of Jewish prophetic experience, and that perhaps the burning bush, and we're well outside of my area of expertise, as you can feel, but I'm honestly relating my understanding of this article, that the burning bush itself might have been the result of such a combination of medicines. And so that has been my inquiry, and where I feel like there's a lot of richness is how can plant medicine, in particular what I've been working with, but others, like reopen the door to Jewish prophetic experiences.
That's good. Put it on my lap so I can look out. Hi, everyone. Wow, it is so amazing to be here gathered for this conversation. Thank you. My name is Natalie Lila Ginsberg, and I've worked at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for over a decade now. I've done a number of different things there. I'm currently the Global Impact Officer, and almost 4 years ago now, I co-founded the Jewish Psychedelic Summit with Madison and Rabbi Zach. Thank you. I'm very proud of that work that we did. And while we were all, motivated by a similar experience, but also different places, it really allowed us to kind of build as wide of a tent as we could to invite in the question of what is Jewish psychedelic experience and what does that mean to our very big community. Rabbi Zach mentioned that he estimates almost 1 million Jewish people have experienced psychedelics. I would lovingly say I think even more. I would say even more than 1 million Israelis alone have experienced a psychedelic. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think that's part of what we've been really examining. Why are psychedelics something that so many Jewish people have been open to exploring, have been drawn to exploring? You know, we talk a lot about our thousands of years of intergenerational trauma, that perhaps there's something subconsciously drawing us to that, and how Judaism invites in so much questioning and so much space for exploration that we don't quite know, but we're allowed to ask questions. And that's been really meaningful. And then also a bit of what Madison was speaking to, of how, and David as well, that a lot of Jews have kind of lost their connection to spirituality within Judaism. So finding spirituality in the form of sacred medicines and other ceremonies was more available. And yeah, I was particularly motivated by this community of Jews I was meeting throughout my work at MAPS, who were saying, oh yeah, I'm Jewish and I'm spiritual, but I actually much more connect with Hinduism or with the Kashinawa or with all these different beautiful traditions. So I was really, motivated to ask, well, do you know much about the Jewish mystical traditions that might be able to support that journey? I'll wrap it quickly and say that one of the many other things that's very exciting to me is understanding not just our ancestral traditions and rituals to support this, but actually our ancestral medicines. David mentioned rue, which when rue is combined with acacia, which is mentioned many times in the Torah as a very sacred tree and substance that's used in many forms, combined creates an ayahuasca-like experience. And acacia has DMT in it. And rue was actually found in a vessel from ancient Egypt a few months ago that was used in a ceremonial way. So we know rue was being used at the time. And I also appreciated the cannabis shout outs because though, in classic Jewish community, no one can agree exactly, but Kinei Bosim is mentioned multiple times in the Torah that I personally believe means cannabis. And we actually did find in 800 BC another ritual altar outside Jerusalem that contained cannabis in it. And it said Yahweh in Hebrew underneath. So we at least know cannabis was used at some point by ancient Israelites as well. And maybe I'll wrap it for now, and thank you.
Thanks. I knew that was going to be a Jewish 2-minute opening statement frame. I wanna see if I can press, because part of what is in my brain since we're at Harvard Law School is this taking. So you guys are like the source material, right? Like here's what's actually happening in this community. We'll hear from other communities later, actually quite soon today. And part of what I'm interested in is thinking, well, how would that translate into how courts understand religious use of psychedelics? So with indigenous communities, it was a little bit easier because, right, there's like a long-standing tradition, there are texts, there are ceremonies central, and even with what I would call indigenous adjacent organizations. So people maybe not directly in a Shepibo lineage, but kind of like Adena mentioned, working with people in that lineage. So if we were called as a witness or something to say in 1 or 2 sentences, like the meaning, like in what way is this a Jewish practice? What would your answer be to that? And it would just popcorn it out. We don't have to go in order, and you don't have to answer. And obviously it's subjective, right?
I think for me and my community and the people that I have been in contact with, this is largely a recovery mission. That we have lost something in the transmission of our traditions over time. We heard about the European Enlightenment, we've heard about the suppression of ecstatic traditions, potentially plant-based traditions. And there is a sense from me and others that the fullness of our tradition, what we are able to experience and what we're able to share, that we are hindered, that we are in some ways without a limb that helps us express fully what is actually the promise of our ancestral tradition. And so we have these medicines to help us regain that consciousness and regain the ability to feel it in that way.
All right, that was affidavit number 1.
Okay, I'll try. I mean, first I'll just quote some people that have been in my containers saying things like, I'm feeling my Judaism in my body for my first time. And just having experiences, we've had a Sefer Torah in proximity, just having experiences with our artifacts and rituals that, or their lineage as a priest that are being enlivened in their body. I don't know if this answers your question, but we haven't talked about just the collective experience of Jewish trauma. And when we scheduled our high holiday retreat, which was supposed to be between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I looked at the calendar and saw October 7th and was like, great, thank you. So it was challenging, but we sat on October 7th. And so I don't know if this answers your question about being an ancient Jewish practice, but,
Contemporary is better, yeah.
touching on the point that there is a collective trauma and a collective story that the community is healing from, and the power of bringing people together, incorporating our healing language, healing prayers, healing rituals, and enlivening that with medicine. I think there's a lot to be said in that affidavit that would, be strong.
Having been a congregational rabbi for 3 decades, where most of my work was unpacking baggage, to try to create, take incredibly meaningful rituals that have just been, for lots of reasons, many of us know, inaccessible, and when we substitute 4 cups of mushroom tea in place of the 4 cups of wine in the Passover Seder, we have an experience opens up that truly wrestles with existential liberation. And so I just think that this is a tool that our people have, wine, tea. We've always understood that there's the need to become disinhibited to get to essential spiritual experience. There's just been so much trauma and other things that have just gotten in the way, and we have now a tool to enable us to renew a rich and powerful tradition.
So I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed Hasidim who said not until I did LSD or ayahuasca or fill in the blank that I finally understood what the Baal Shem Tov was talking about. The founder of the Hasidic movement, I think this tracks with Sam's talk or Yosef's or whoever. So there's that, number one. Number two, what absent from the conversation so far, Ido Cohen, a therapist in the audience, pointed out is the word God. No one has really mentioned the G word so far. And I think really intertwining the use of psychedelics as prayer, intertwined with direct experience of Hashem, of God, whatever you want to call it, is really vital from a legal perspective, because the country, the Constitution is is founded on religious expression. And so no one can argue with your relationship with how you're accessing God. And I think really bringing that in is a vital, I would say for me, it's been a lubricant for prayer. It's definitely not a prerequisite, but I feel I learned how to pray through my psychedelic experiences. And then the prayer became then an integration of the psychedelic consciousness, and being able to really track that through legalese that has weight, using words like sacrament or whatever, I'll let the lawyers fill in the blanks, is really important. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, and just to not shy away from the words like prayer and God.
I'll just agree with you, Madison. For me, the idea of God was a mythological creature from a book I found moderately interesting as a teenager. And then I was having actual vivid experiences of this same being. And so plant medicine for me was access, open the door to believing in, but not through faith, through direct experience with a God that I had already pushed aside.
Maybe I'll bring us back a little bit to the ancient, and we haven't mentioned ketoret, which was an incense that was burned in the temple, and it was a very sacred incense, and there's basically like a holy hot box to kind of ensure that the incense is really being inhaled. So to me, that kind of is evidence of some precedence historically of altered states and engaging with different plant medicines. So I would hope that would be part of the court case.
That's great. Thank you. Obviously, I'm sorry we didn't get. We're like, all right, except for Victoria, we don't have time for questions from the. But you know.
That's a lot of pressure is the only question. But I guess I'm wondering maybe there are people in the room who actually do find value in existing Jewish established religions communities, right? And I'm hearing a lot of you say, look, we're renewing, we're bringing something new, we're changing. And I guess the question I'm posing is, for you all, is your vision of psychedelic Judaism like a new strain of Judaism, or is it bringing Judaism, psychedelics, and integrating that without integrating, you know, lots of Jews who find value? There's critiques to be made of established Judaism, but I think it's a lot of alienation is what I'm hearing from this panel.
No bad parts. I'll just say that quick. Yeah, no bad parts. Everything's coming along, right? We're not cutting anything off. If this is a supplement, if this is a vitamin, if whatever the metaphor is, there are people who need sometimes a little bit of resuscitation in order to walk among the living. And my hope through Shefa and all of these wonderful people is that there are places where that resuscitation can happen so that people can go and bring that revitalization back to their communities that they love. But there has to be some third space beyond the shul, beyond the Beit Midrash, right? Some house of actually seeking divinity and hearing a voice, maybe their own, maybe from beyond, that they can bring back.
I see it happening at some shuls. And I'll say I am actually really inspired. I see this work as a bridge to invite people who are disaffected back into more traditional Judaism, but also finding, kind of inviting out the parts of Judaism that can meet people there. And I think that's the work that is most exciting to me, rather than creating something new, drawing up what's there to invite people in to be able to resonate and connect back.
I think it's
Rabbi?
I think it's been the challenge in every generation. You know, Chadesh Yemenu Kekedem, you know, Rav Kook said, let's make the old new and the new sacred. That's what we've been doing. That's the enterprise across countless generations. So it is nothing new. To renew is nothing new for Judaism or any spiritual path.
I'll say quickly, as the disaffected one, I went back to the temple that I was bar mitzvahed in and was able to see the inverse of what I had experienced before. So as a child, I'm discarding everything because so much of it doesn't resonate. And now as a much more mature adult who's had direct experience, I'm able to really focus on that which does resonate.
So,
John,
like,
yeah.
I was informed by Noah that there's actually more oil in the jar, and it can last for not 7 more days, but at least for 11 more minutes. So we do have so we'll go
Okay.
one, and then David in the back. Do you want to come down?
Jay,
David?
can I jump in on the question?
What's that?
Can I
Sure,
jump
yeah.
in on the question that was just asked? Oh, I just wanted to say, I love your question, Victoria. That I think I'm echoing everyone else, but the work that we've been doing is a lot of opportunity to integrate with existing communities. So, for example, our High Holiday program, we gathered in person between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then encouraged everyone to go, whoever wanted to go to services together on the ends of it. And I mean, yeah, I would just say there's been, like, you know, we have all different types of Jews, and like I said, some non-Jews coming, some of whom are, you know, in deep practice with their current communities and are finding that this brings more richness, some who feel it's calling them back, you know, so I think we're seeing a little bit of everything. And what feels very true to me is that the deeper this work gets, the more I realize how rich our tradition is and how much it gives us everything we need to work with this work. It's kind of wild to say, like, oh, I want to design a ceremony for this holiday, and then looking at our liturgy and being like, wow, it's all there.
Madison, I was wondering,
just-
yeah,
oh,
like
I
some of
just
the
wanna-
Hasidim who are not off the derech. I'm
What?
curious. I'm
Yeah, I
curious.
just want to make an argument in favor of having psychedelic experiences in strictly halachic spaces because, like, blending like legal stuff with Jewish law, like halacha, is like really, I think, like the way to legitimize and show that like no one's making up religion here, right? All it's doing is like rekindling a fire in what are already like quote legitimately Jewish spaces according to halacha, and it's not like anyone can say, it's like hippy dippy like California Judaism.
But why not?
Well, no, there's nothing wrong with hippie. I grew up Hindu. I grew up in hippie dippy California Judaism. No, we can innovate, but I think within the realm of halacha, at least from a legal perspective, like the American government can't argue with halacha like as like a form of like Jewish expression, whereas like renewal Judaism or anything else that's like kind of bending things, like they could say like, oh, okay, this is like kind of made up, maybe.
I'm going to leave that there, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
That's good.
All right.
I want to give, I'm AriYael. I want to give voice to also Sephardic Jewry that perhaps didn't lose as much touch with this enchantment. And I want to echo that maybe what Jill mentioned about Hilulim, the concept of Hilulot, which is certainly today not what it was, for example, in Morocco, where my father is from. And my father, I grew up in an interesting mix of Hasidut and Sephardic Jewry in a very mystical sort of ambience. And my father was rock star. He opened for The Who and Bachman Turner Overdrive and such, and then fused that back with Piyutim, back with Chazanut. And so I just want to give voice to perhaps that those wells aren't buried as deep, and that recovery mission, there's a lot to look towards amongst those practices.
I don't know if it's on. Since this is the month of Adar, Rabbi Goldblatt, is it?
Yeah.
You mentioned our drinking 4 cups of wine, but I never kind of paid attention to this before because the phrase is in Hebrew, chayav adam libesume, a person should, it usually is translated as getting drunk. However, we all know that the word bosem is not about wine.
No.
So you have to get high to the point where you're no longer in the world of duality. That's actually what the phrase is in the teaching. And this is what you do on Purim, on the day when we mask to
Unmasked.
reveal what is concealed. But I would also just like to make a comment, which is, as a psychologist and as someone who is partakes of ceremonial work and teaches that, I would say that just because Freud was Jewish, we don't need to own psychology. So I don't think we need to own this, but that's a trauma that we have to deal with. We don't have to own everything, but we certainly can make use of it, as has been said, in some very powerful ways. So thanks.
Thanks. We have time for one more. Wow, there's like 18 different people. Lila, you could just give it to James there in the back. Just go in the back somewhere.
Okay, thank you all. In Houston Smith's article on "Do Drugs Have Religious Import?", towards the end he says that it's clear that psychedelics can occasion a religious experience, but not necessarily a religious life. I'm curious for you all if that resonates, and what are some tools that you use to translate those experiences into some kind of religious life or ongoing commitment?
Who's going first? I don't know.
I can speak a little bit. I think first and foremost, actually having community of other people who have shared spiritual experiences, seeking to implement new rituals and ways of grounding is really helpful. Something like observing Shabbat has been something I've heard from many Jews reconnecting through psychedelics. All of a sudden now there's a weekly, really deep grounding ritual to bring them back. So I think that in Judaism, there's a lot of different options. So being open to like what is most drawing you, whether it's singing Moda'ani in the morning, like where's like the touch point that allows you to connect to that experience, perhaps outside of some of the rigidity that is also in Judaism.
I'll say thank you for the question. Yeah, in that article, he also says that we should not only be talking about altered states, but also about altered traits. And so how do we make sure that all of these experiences are not staying merely with us, but that the ripples of our insights are flowing outward toward the people who are not in the tent, who are not in the circle? At Sheffa, after a few years of experimentation online, in person, during lockdown and everything that we've done, we have finally kind of landed on a community model where we are incorporating prayer, prayer circles, breath work, and also sacred ketamine work guided by a physician, but also with integration offerings every month as well. But then that's only inside the tent. We're also then launching conscious community action, starting in the Bay Area, in Oakland, and other places, where the things that we are doing inside our practice space, we're integrating further with others in order to achieve those altered traits.
Zach, could I just guide us to the last thing? I know there's more to say on that
It's okay.
question, but I'm just curious, one of the key factors in any, both for responsible practice and also for legal recognition, is safety and
Yeah.
what are the, there's a risk in a panel like this where we just talk about the good stuff, right? But obviously there's a lot of harm to consider and harm reduction to consider. And I wonder if we could close just with a moment or two from those of you who want to say something about what are the existing safeguards in place around this kind of sacramental practice, and yeah, that's it.
Well, we have medical screenings for our ketamine work. We work with physicians who, first we interview people to make sure that this is the right experience for them right now. They go through a medical screening with our team physician, and we are with them throughout the process. So not only just the preparation, the experience itself, but we're working in community in these groups for much longer than people say that we should, up 1 to 2 months, to make sure that everything that someone needs after having worked with medicine with us, that they have, and they have immediately.
Can I address the religious life question?
Sure, but really just in a minute, because I want to make sure to cover harm reduction in the panel.
I think I just wanted to say about that when we say a more religious life, what are we asking? And sometimes we forget that religion is meant to make us more human, better humans. And so I just think it's a broader question. What I'm seeing is both, yes, it's enhancing people's religious, spiritual lives, but really Judaism is geared to make us better humans. And I think there's a question of, I think that it's doing that. Longer answer. On the safety piece, all I'll say on that is that for me, it's been very important to work with holders of the medicine. So even though I'm holding the space and designing the space as well, like I am always looking for very seasoned, trained people to work with, and I'm cautious. I don't have the answer to this, but I'm cautious of people that are saying, like, let's get a bunch of Jewish people together and take medicine and sing Jewish songs and not, just staying with as much fidelity as possible to all of these conversations about harm and safety.
Great. We're pretty much out of time. Dan, do you want to bring us home? And then...
Sure. I too want to say that part of the harm reduction relates to the previous question, which is this isn't about experience for the sake of experience. When we did our sacred intimacy couples retreat, there were practices that we introduced in how to offer and receive blessings, how to take bedecken, a pre-ceremony of the Jewish wedding tradition, and use that unveiling, that is to say, unmasking, the celebration of intimacy, integrating that into a routine between a couple, so that when people have practices that they take away from these experiences, it deepens their ability to make meaning from them. It also provides, when we track, beyond the comprehensive intake and medical professionals who review for red flags, following up with people and, doing integration a week later, a month later, 5 months later, staying in contact, we can track issues that arise and get them the support they need for harm reduction.
Thanks so much to the panel.